A great big Pensacola welcome to the most engaged citizens in the state of Florida. Those of you who are tuned in today to ECW Live, I'm John Singley, your host, and we're going to ask a simple but very important question for our future here. Have we lost Perdido Bay? To help us unpack that, we've invited John Nixon, who's the president of Phenix Environmental Response, into the studios. John, welcome.
Hi, John. Happy to be here.
John, there has been some new news about the water quality and these, the estuaries in our area. When the U.S. EPA and the county government, the city of Pensacola, announced the establishment of the Pensacola and a Perdido Bay estuary program with grants and money to go along with it. You've been looking at this for some time. Tell us how you got interested.
Well, I guess simply I've spent a career helping companies identify violations or compliance concerns within their operations. I've been all over the country and in some countries outside of the country to help them identify where they might be out of compliance. And so when Andy Marlette had an article in the paper back in the spring, I said, that's something I can do for the community. Maybe I can use my expertise, my specialized expertise, and kind of dig into this a little bit and establish what the actual facts are. And that's what I've been doing since May, I guess.
John, Andy Marlette, of course, is the editorial cartoonist for the Pensacola News Journal, and he posted his column online, and it generated quite a bit of buzz, or trending buzz, as we like to say. And his main thesis was the role that the International Paper Company mill up in Cantonment plays in the health of Perdido Bay. What was your takeaway from Andy's column?
Well, first of all, Andy is a satirist, so I asked Andy online. I said, "What is your intention with this story that you're publishing?" And I never got a response. And so I think it was worthy of some attention to say, just out of curiosity, just how bad is it in Cantonment with this industry that's been in operation for decades. And so we spent quite a bit of time looking through the documents and establishing the timelines and looking at the history and the compliance issues that have come up since at least the 1970s.
And you relied on data from the government, I suppose, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and others?
That's correct. I found the most helpful information from the EPA site. It's the Toxic Release Inventory site. It's a regulation within the EPA that helps or requires companies that use specific types of chemicals to track the use and disposal of these chemicals. And so when I research international paper, that's usually my go-to is the TRI report first. I found quite a few things that of interest and flags that needed to be pursued. And that's kind of where we are today. What was found and what should be shared with the community.
And spell out some of those flags that caught your attention.
Well, first of all, the TRI report it requires, like I said, companies that use specific types of chemicals above certain thresholds to report annually what their use is and ultimate disposal methods are. And so they chart that out. When I looked at the MSA, the Pensacola MSA, it includes, there's a listing of the top 5 polluters in the county. And this was important to understand because of the Forbes report in 2017 that showed Escambia County as the number 11th most toxic county in the nation. And we're going to go into that slide here in a little bit. And so when I pulled up the TRI report, it showed the 5, and IP was, in fact, number 2 on the list. One of the flags immediately from that is that compared to Ascend performance, which we'll talk about some other time, it barely showed up on the chart. And ascend is way out here, and so I'm wondering, that can't be right, because I knew from looking at the permit from International Paper, they were authorized and were actually discharging 28 million gallons of contaminated water per day. And so when I quantified that out, because the report is in pounds, and I realized that the water that they are discharging is still toxic, even though it's tremendously diluted. It is still killing fish and still impairing reproduction of some of the fish test species. And so when you quantify that out, it's not 28 million gallons a day. It's 85 billion pounds a year of contaminated water that's being directly discharged into Perdido Bay. Now, there's various levels of contamination, but every time they do a quarterly test, they have failed like 12 of the last 13 quarters those tests. So they have been out of compliance for at least 12 of the last 13 quarters.
So, John, if a citizen said to you, if they're out of compliance, why are they allowed to continue operating? Can you explain how that works?
Actually, that's a very good question. Some of the responses we get out of the Florida Department of Environmental Management Protection is the company is in compliance with the permit. Well, that's actually not completely true. They're in compliance with their consent order. Now, the reason they have a court-ordered consent order is because they can't meet compliance of the permit, and the consent order allows them a variance from those requirements and a little bit of time to figure out in their operations what's causing the non-compliance and the fish contaminated fish killings, actually.
So what you're saying here is a consent order is where a judge, a court, is involved in an operating permit. How did we get into the position of the courts being involved in International Paper Company's operating permit?
That's a good question. It's an administrative judge, and it's a tool that's allowed under the Clean Water Act that will give a company in good standing the opportunity to, instead of shutting them down for being out of compliance, it gives them opportunity, a little bit of time to figure things out and retain their operations. What the problem is with International Paper and Cantonment is that they've used this tool excessively over the last 50 years.
Now, International Paper is a big employer in Escambia County, and a lot of families depend on the earnings and the livelihood from International Paper. And you say that they are basically out of compliance, as I understand it, with their operating permit?
That's a true statement.
Well, that's a pretty remarkable set of information to offer up here. You brought some slides that would allow you to go into some more detail at how you interpret the data and how you've drawn these conclusions and the red flags that you've seen. You want to share some of those with us?
Sure. Let's just breeze through these pretty quickly. This slide is the top 5 polluters. Again, it's the Forbes report from the Tri-Data established Escambia County as the number 11th most polluted or toxic county in the country. And in perspective, we're one little dot out of over 3,000 counties in the country, and in Alaska and Hawaii on the southwest corner there. And so being number 11 out of so many different areas and so many different industries is really quite astonishing. It was surprising, and my first response was, how could we let that happen? And in this report, as you read through this, it in fact shows where Escambia falls in the total pounds in which they release compared to the other companies or the other counties. The next chart shows the cities. Cantonment is actually number 10, most toxic in the country, And a quick Google search is about 20,000 incorporated cities in the country. So 10 out of 20,000 is being in a top 10 is not the list you want to be on.
John, Forbes magazine, for our viewers, is a business-oriented magazine. It's a fairly credible publication over the years. And the date of this report, do you have that handy if somebody wanted to go look it up in the library?
Yeah, John, I think the P&J published this in December of 2017. And we have a link if I can leave that with you. But the source of this data is different now. Well, you've had environmental working groups come in and rate the water, public water, and I had quite a few questions on that because it just wasn't, there was no standard in which to report that information. On the other hand, with the EPA in these reports, there is a standard method on acquiring the data. It's industry provides this data. It's self-reporting data, and it's been in the structure for 20 years, almost 30 years. And so there's a standard method to acquire the data, validate the data, and report the data. And so there are set parameters. So it's the credibility of the data is significantly more than you would get from a group like Environmental Working Group, just for perspective. So Cantonment is number 10 in the country out of close to 20,000 cities, and that's significant. And these chemicals that they're measuring are on this list because they're dangerous. They're known to cause cancer. They're known to impair health, and they're known to kill living organisms. And it's something that we might not fully understand because we have no way to relate that number to. But if you work with these chemicals like I have and others over the years, you realize, well, if you're on the try list, that's not a good list to be on. But if you're number 10, that's extremely dangerous. And I think that the story needs to be told for a lot of reasons, one of which the Department of Environmental Protection has not been telling the story for us.
You mean the Florida State Department of Environmental Protection?
That's
right?
That's correct.
DEP, otherwise known as DEP.
And one example, John, of hearing and being involved in the community a little bit and a little bit sensitive to these conversations, I'm hearing from our commissioners that, they're in compliance. They've invested all this money. They're doing all these great things in Cantonment at the paper mill, and then you hear a district state representative saying the same thing. They're in compliance. They have never been out of compliance. And I start to question, well, what is the source of this information? I don't think it's their intent to give wrong information, but what is the source? So when I ask the question, it always goes back to the Department of Environmental Protection. So the logical step is to give them a call and ask the questions. Well, that really didn't come up. And I said, well, how could it not come up? And this chart shows the violations that clearly contradict what the DEP has been telling our elected officials, our community leaders, regarding the safety of international paper. And so that's another flag that need to be pursued. And for everything that we talk about today, there are multiple layers beneath that not only support the data, but also create larger discrepancies within what we've been told. And I think it's important, one of which is that the community of Cantonment has been absorbing the gases and the effluents from this plant for decades in the collectively billions of tons. And upon inquiry, apparently there has been no outreach into the community by our department.
So you've spoken to the Department of Environmental Protection regarding their outreach to the public, particularly in the vicinity of the paper mill.
That's right. We have. I've been in several conversations and email conversations, and then in fact I was with you and your group a few weeks ago doing interviews from the neighbors of the plant. I thought was very insightful. And so you have witnesses that live this reality every day, and they're saying, well, we don't know of any outreach. We watch the television, we listen to the radio, we read the paper, we look at the billboards. There's nothing that, and these are lifelong residents, there's nothing that warns them or gives them an avenue in which to follow up on if there was a question about the toxicity that's impermeating through their homes into their living rooms.
So, John, the quandary, I guess, for the average citizen is that they depend upon their elected representatives and their state agencies to guide them in matters of health and welfare. And what would you say about the fact that the Florida DEP may not be altogether forthcoming on the danger present in these chemical emissions from the International Paper Mill?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we should rely on our public officials, our elected officials, to be transparent and honest with the community. But they can only be as honest as what the experts are telling them. The experts at the Department of Environmental Protection have chosen not to be fully
forthcoming.
Yeah,
right.
Fully forthcoming with all the data.
Yeah, and to allow these consent orders and waivers to sort of roll along for some number of time here, allowing the company to improve its processes and produce a cleaner effluent. Is there a relationship between, in your mind, between the state regulators and industry itself in general?
Oh, sure. You see that in every industry, that the regulators, and sometimes it's referred to as a revolving door, that the regulators will, after their term as an appointed a public official, they will acquire a key job within the industry in which they're regulating. And so this was written, I guess, reporting from the administrator of DEP back in 2004. I think he was a Jeb Bush appointee. Mr. Strews was the regulator for IP in Florida, and then after his term in Tallahassee, he was granted a VP spot in Memphis for IP. So the AD with DEP was awarded a VP with IP. If you make a little jingle out of that.
Yeah, you make a jingle. But this is 2004, and the administrator of Florida DEP resigned or retired, and then became an executive with the International Paper Company. I think that's one person could say, well, International Paper Company values his experience in regulatory issues, and they would add him to the payroll to make the company better at this. Others would say that our regulators are always looking at jobs in industry, so that may cloud their view of their regulatory responsibilities. That's the debate that's normally framed up in these circumstances, the revolving door, as many people call it.
That's a good point, and it has an opportunity to cloud their judgment or jeopardize the regulations. There's some latitude in the regulations. The consent orders is one administrative tool we talked about that allows companies to violate the permit. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. They're killing fish every day under this consent order, which grants them the immunity from compliance requirements as long as they stay within this new factor.
So, John, I notice you got a couple more slides up here. Let's throw one or two more up and look at the information that you presented.
Well, this is the mission statement with the Department of Environmental Protection. This is right off their website, and I think it's important for people who care about this about the environment that we live and breathe and raise our children in, that we understand that the DEP, or whoever the agency is following through with what they're promising. That's what a mission statement is. It's a promise to the constituents on this is how we look at things. This is what you can expect from us. And we can look at the vision and the values of leadership and integrity and accountability and communication and service, and we could, if we wanted to, we could challenge every one of those in this particular case. I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is to expose the discrepancies with what they have been telling us and become aware of what our reality is, not somebody else's truth.
So, John, we're looking today at the whole issue of have we lost Perdido Bay? And Andy Marlette suggested that the effluents from International Paper's mill may be contributing to the degradation of the water quality in Perdido Bay. Tell us, for the average citizen, a little bit how a mill's production process would impact the bay. What is the channel, the means by which this happens in this case?
Well, it takes a significant amount of water to process paper. That's something we know. They source their water from on-site wells and also ECUA, their wastewater that has been treated. They pump it into the process. And IP uses the water for a lot of different things. A good bit of it is to feed the scrubbers that's extracting the toxins from the stacks, or some of them. Mm-hmm. And that water captures these contaminants, these toxins, and then it goes through a wastewater treatment facility there on site, and then it goes into various treatment stages, and then ultimately discharged. So their permit capacity and their at capacity is 28 million gallons a day, and so you have to wonder, well, how much settling is really allowed if you're processing that amount of water every day. And so that's what we're finding is that back a few years ago they thought one solution might be to pump this not directly into 11 Mile Creek again, like they had been for decades, but to pipe it down to a company-owned wetlands, to where the natural degradation of the chemicals would help minimize the toxicity and address some of those other concerns. Yeah. But we're finding that the volume is so high and the production goes up when they got authority to do that the wetlands is dying, and the effluent is still violating the water quality standards for that body of water.
So the idea is that this treated effluent from the paper mill is no longer channeled to 11 Mile Creek. It now goes into the wetlands, which I'm envisioning something like a swamp or a boggy area, mm-hmm. and the natural filtration of the soil and the trees and things there filters this effluent, and as it moves toward Escambia Bay. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, I think so. And with any ecosystem, there's a balance. You want to try to establish a balance, but if you overpower the balance with toxic effluent, then you're not. Then the estuary or the wetlands is beyond their ability to treat.
Does Florida Department of Environmental Protection monitor those wetlands to see what exactly is the effluent doing?
I think to some extent, the project was deemed as a pilot program, but when that was approved, I don't think anybody realized it would be a 10-year pilot. So it's been going on for probably seven of those 10 years.
We're with John Nixon, who's the president of Phenix Environmental Response, and he's helping us understand this whole issue of the linkages between the paper mill at Cantonment and the water quality in Perdido Bay. The U.S. EPA has established this program working with the county and other government agencies in the area to help restore these bodies of water using existing data. And they emphasize that it's a non-regulatory program, but the existing data seems open to question. I don't know if that's the right description. People interpret it in different ways. So John has been helping us understand a little bit from his point of view and his expertise for many years in compliance, environmental compliance, about exactly what the data means. John, as you look forward here, going forward, are you optimistic that the water quality is going to get better?
Well, I hope so. I think the objective here is to bring people into awareness of just how significant the problems are. If we have our regulator that have been coached to trust, that have not been telling us the full story, or misleading us, whether intentionally or not, I think that's one of the objectives here is to bring the reality to the front. We can't rely on our elected officials that are relying. Well, let me back up. I think we need to rely on our elected officials. That's their job, and the ones I've spoken with have embraced that, and they see it as an opportunity to help. But if they're relying on data that's half truth, then that just circumvents the whole process of being transparent and understanding, or letting the community understand just how bad this is.
John, I understand that Florida Department of Environmental Protection has promulgated a number that a citizen can call regarding obnoxious odors emanating in the
Right.
cantonment area. I guess that's the right word, obnoxious odors. Tell us a little bit about that and your experience with that.
Well, actually, Governor DeSantis set up, when he came into office, an Office of Transparency, Accountability, and Environmental Accountability and Transparency. And so there is a number that's published that we can give. Also, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they have a compliance and enforcement administrator in Tallahassee. That may be an avenue in which to call with concerns or questions. Obviously, our Northwest District here in Pensacola would be a good source, but I'm hoping, because we've exposed some of these things, that they are starting to realize that maybe we should be more transparent and thorough in our discussion.
Yeah, I remember the immediately after being inaugurated, Governor DeSantis, in his first budget markup, shifted money in the state budget from the Florida Wildlife Commission, I believe it was, over to DEP specifically for compliance purposes. So it was an initial step to beef up their compliance section. How's that played out from as best you can tell?
I haven't heard of any accounts. That was originally the emphasis with that program is the algae in South Florida. But in reading the documents carefully, that it does. It's not just restricted to the algae blooms and the deadly red algae that we see there.
So what is the published number for our viewers who are interested in reporting obnoxious, is that the right word, smell? Is that, am I using the right terms out of the statute?
You can you can use obnoxious, because that's what they are, but they are defined as objectionable odors, and it's a very detailed definition. And we found by calling DEP, the local office here, that if you fall outside the strict definition of objectionable, then they will just let it go. Well, it doesn't meet the definition of what we consider objectionable, so we're not going to go out and take a look at it or go smell it. We'll just let you deal with it until you can find the right terms in which to identify this odor that's permeating into your living rooms. Don't bother us. That's the perception we get, and so that's the need to call these other numbers. But by all means, Brandy Smith with the DEP is the Northwest Office External Affairs Manager, and she would be a good one to contact.
Well, we're going to reach out to Brandy Smith and the DEP to help us understand this issue a little bit better, and we look forward to talking with them about that as the series continues. I understand there's going to be an upcoming public meeting. What do you know about that, and what does it concern?
On the estuaries, or which one are you referring to?
I think this is, as I'm
Is that
told,
the
this is
permit?
on the
On the consent
International
order?
Paper Company's permit.
When they were issued the last permit in 2010, they were, what circumvented that was the consent order, and they've been working under a consent order with the requirement to establish or to find out why they're killing fish. And it gave them 10 years to do so. They asked for an extension in January of this year, and that extension expires in April of 2020. Part of that consent order is to perform a study as to establish the source of the contamination. And my understanding is that that deadline to publish that report is September of this year,
Like next month.
That's right.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So the timing with this is really crucial, because the DEP will ultimately decide whether to extend another consent order for another 10, 12 years, or actually hold the company accountable to meet the water quality standards that were established many years ago. They've never achieved.
Now, let me make sure I understand this. DEP is due to put out a report next month, in the month of September.
I think so. I think there'll be 2 opportunities for public comment on that. They'll announce it in the paper.
Well, they better hurry up.
It'll probably be in the
football season is next weekend.
That's right.
And that always signals September.
That's
to
right.
me.
It's probably. I don't think there's any requirement as to when they publish it. Just as within a time frame, and it could be on a Saturday during a football game.
Well, I got a question for you, John.
And it's usually in the classified and very minute.
Yeah,
print.
well, that's what I'm going to ask you about. In your experience here, many years of doing this, the data is telling us that people that are 35 and under who may have an interest in this don't read the newspaper classified ads, and many people 35 to 45 years old don't do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you would put something in newspaper classified ads in the year 2019? Is that an effective way to conduct public outreach?
No, that's not effective, but it's compliant. That's what they're required to do, and whether it makes sense now or not is not the question. It's what the requirement is, and do they satisfy the requirement? Much like the notices for the county commission meetings. There's a requirement where they have to notify the public when, and those are, and then DEP will do the same thing.
Well, we're speaking with John Nixon, who's the president of Phenix Environmental Response. Many years experience helping companies do the right thing with their environmental projects. John, thank you for coming in this afternoon. It's been, to say, eye-opening, to say the least. And any last words you want to share with us? I've got one more question for you, but I want to get your last chance here on the table.
Well, it's a very complex problem, and there's a lot of factors that go into doing the right thing. I mean, you want to retain employment. There's a lot of benefits, personal and family benefits that goes with the employment. There's a tremendous amount of county taxes that are derived from that plant being in operation. But we've got to be better at finding the correct balance. Right now, the environment has been overlooked, even by our Department of Environmental Protection. They feel justified in doing what they have done. And one of the questions they asked just real quickly is that, John, do you think it's okay if we force them to do another study to find out exactly why they're killing fish? I said, no, normally, yeah, but these guys have been doing another study for 50 years. It's a $24 billion corporation. I think the time has come to ask International Paper to invest in our community, not just by scholarships and cake sales, but with what really matters, and the air we breathe and the water we drink and swim in and enjoy, and that we need to bring that into the conversation to help find the balance.
If you have any questions or comments or things in general, you can post your comments to the ECW Live page or to your favorite group page, wherever you are viewing this on, and we'll certainly pass that along to John or the regulators or whoever you'd like. We've reached out to International Paper, and we look forward to sitting down and talking with them at some point as we continue this series on Have We Lost Perdido Bay? It's a very important question for the future here as we become a strong county. So for all of us here at in the studio today, Teresa Hill, our producer and director, John Nixon, our guest, and all who've supported us in this undertaking, thank you very much. And again, we'll be looking for your comments. This will help us help you learn more about this subject and the value that these estuaries play in our future now and in the future itself. So for all of us here, once again, thank you, and be very safe out there.